Russell Street Replay. My name is Nikhil. Mehta. I'm really excited to bring this podcast back for the Ravens 2024 season. With me today is my good friend Thayjus Pancholi. Thayjus, how are you doing today?
I'm very tired. I flew a red eye from my home in Washington State back to where I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I did not sleep a lick. The little monitor that Delta gives you to watch movies on had like the worst audio ever, so I was just sitting there stewing. It was a great time. Great time.
Yeah,
Back hurts.
not a
It's great.
fun place to be after that game. Ravens were a toe away from tying that game, and I saw something that it looked like John Harbaugh might have been signaling to go for two after that touchdown, which I don't know. I don't really want to get into what ifs here. It's the
It's
kind
the
of
right
thing that
decision.
if it works, he's a genius. If not, everyone pillories him.
No, it's the right process.
Not wanting to go into OT against the Chiefs, giving yourself a 50-50 shot on one play versus a 50-50 shot on a coin flip, I think is a fine strategy. But it didn't even come to pass. Ravens dropped that one. A game that, they could have won. Should they have won? Probably not. I don't know. I felt like they didn't. I felt like it was a miracle basically that they were in the game at the very end. I want to get one quick thing out of the way though, is the refereeing, the officiating, because I think it's, as Ravens fans, I think we've kind of gotten used to just getting frustrated about officiating going up against two teams, namely the Patriots and the Chiefs, over the years. And it feels like the Chiefs have kind of slid into that spot where the Patriots were in terms of feeling like they get every flag. Um, I don't know. I think if the Ravens played well enough that they should have run away with this game without the penalties, I think I'd have more to say about it. But they didn't play well enough that those penalties made a big enough difference. I think those penalties are symptomatic of some bigger issues that they're just is going to talk about later. But I don't know. I think, the illegal formation penalties, for example. I think that, they have refs there in the preseason. They have refs in training camp. Ronnie Stanley was saying it was enforced differently. He felt like they were trying to make an example out of him. Even Andy Reid kind of hinted at that after the game. He was saying he was glad they got the ball second so that the refs could kind of start enforcing that penalty on the Ravens first and the Chiefs could adjust. So I'm willing to look past that on the Ravens side of things. That's just kind of a bad break, something that is hard to be ready for, especially some of those times. It really didn't look like Stanley was in a bad position, whereas Juwan Taylor looked like he was several times. Other than that, I think there were, the holding on Linderbaum, they're going to call that roughing passer on Matabike every time. I think the things that we got frustrated about in the moment, I think when you look back on them the next day, it did not make a big enough difference to merit more time than I'm spending on it right now. I don't know if you had
Yeah.
anything else really to add.
No, I don't think that it mattered, frankly, at all. I think that it's annoying. I think that it is a bad feeling as a fan. Like it just doesn't feel good as a game persists to have that sort of stuff happen. But at the end of the day, like on the opening drive when Ronnie Stanley apparently isn't allowed to do anything ever in his entire life without like having five cops called on him, they scored a touchdown. They scored a touchdown.
Exactly.
The game was
Exactly.
not impacted. Like the best possible outcome for that drive still occurred with Ronnie Stanley not being allowed to literally do anything in the game. And I kind of kept track of that mentally in my head in terms of, okay, like, did this penalty actually matter? Or, okay, like, we still held the Chiefs to a field goal, for example, on like a nonsensical call or whatever. There were a few, like, I need to go back and think about like the roughing the passer, which was inexcusable, frankly. I know the Linderbaum hold wasn't great, but I think they still got points on that drive. Again,
I
it's
believe
been a
they
long night for
did.
me.
And then, the Chiefs, on the Chiefs side, I think something Andy Reid does, the last thing I'll say about the officiating, Andy Reid kind of coaches his offensive line to hold because he knows there's holding every play anyway, and it's just not going to get called. And that conditions refs to not
You
call
set
holds
your
on
own
the
standard.
Chiefs.
They
Right.
set their own standard for it.
Exactly. And I think that that's something that he's done. I think something he's done dating back to Philadelphia, really. And I think that's another explanation that there, and we're going to get into this later, but there is an aspect to which that Chiefs team is just better coached, and it's better coached than probably every other team in the league. To clarify, and we're going to talk plenty about the Ravens coaching later on, but that is something that comes up when you're playing the best coached team in the league, is that they have the discipline and the ability to make the rules work for them in a way that the Ravens just don't, and that is I don't know if that is so much of an indictment on Harbaugh as much as is just credit to Reed and his career and what he's been able to build. But I do think that once you realize how the refs are playing, and how the game is going with the referees, you have to you have to adjust. I think the Ravens did a good job adjusting on those legal formation penalties the game went on. Anyway, I want to move on from the refereeing, like I said, and move on to really what was the miracle of this game, that they were still in it, and they were in it because of Lamar Jackson. Um, Jackson, the numbers kind of speak for themselves: 26 to 41, 273 through the air, 16 carries for 122 rushing yards. Those numbers would have been bigger if not for a couple plays that got called back. That big rush by that nullified by that Tyler Linderbaum holding. But overall, Thayjus, you said it while we were preparing for 98% of that game. Lamar Jackson was the best football player on the planet, and that's exactly what he can be. I mean, they were at the 3-yard line, and they were a toe away from tying the game in under 2 minutes without any timeouts. That is the kind of thing that Lamar Jackson, people, I wouldn't say Ravens fans, but national media perhaps, has doubted that Lamar Jackson can do, and he did it. He did it pretty much as best as he could. You're one toe away. He missed a couple passes late. They talked about that in the post-game presser, so I don't want to rehash it too much. My big takeaway from Lamar's performance today is just that he was willing to adapt to the situation, and just try and win the game. I didn't feel like it was hero ball because I didn't feel like he was forcing throws. I felt like he was being decisive on his scrambles, in a way that I feel like in previous seasons he'd be trying to hold on to the ball, trying to find a guy downfield, and then he'd get caught either at the line, behind the line, or only get a couple. He was able to get a lot of chunk yards on his scrambles today, something that was really, really big for the Ravens, when they couldn't get anything going downfield. And as we'll talk about later, with some pretty shoddy pass protection from their offensive line. Just what are your thoughts on Lamar? I mean, do you is it really much to take away, or is this just the Lamar we know?
I disagree with you on one point in terms of you don't think he was forcing it because I think the nature of those scrambles, he was not forcing passes. No, he hasn't forced passes, frankly, for a while. He's much more, I think, decisive or intentional is the word with his passing as he's gotten older, which is what you want to see, frankly. But his scrambling, and more importantly, when he would break the line of scrimmage, he was forcing it then. Like when he was past the line of scrimmage with the ball in his hands, he was full go. It was lowering the shoulder. It was we are not sliding. It was a Jaden Daniels at LSU crash bang wallop.
I don't think I would go that
Not to that
far
extent. He was getting out of
because,
bounds, but
yeah,
he
I
was
mean,
lowering the shoulder a decent bit.
he's lowered the shoulder his whole career though, and like going back to Louisville, one of the big hallmarks of Lamar is the way that he controls how he takes contact and goes to the ground. That's something that he like practices. That's something that he's very intentional about because, and I can't remember. He talked about this a while ago. He doesn't like sliding because he feels like it leaves him more vulnerable. And he would rather control how he's going to ground. And he also doesn't shy away from being willing to set a physical tone and let linebackers know that they're going to have to take a hit to bring him down too, just like Henry. So I don't know. I don't know how much he was forcing it in that respect. I do think that there were times when he probably could have gone down or gone out of bounds a little bit quicker. But I think that's Lamar Jackson. I think that's the plus and the negative. And I think the pluses outweigh the negatives.
Oh, it was a plus 100%. I'm saying what I'm interested in seeing is, and you hear about the lost weight, you hear about he feels faster and all these things. And it was definitely a very, very tone-setting performance from him when he had the ball in his hands. What I'm simply saying is I think part of that was just because the adrenaline of going against the Chiefs. Is he like I do not think this man is going to be running the same way he did against the Chiefs against the Las Vegas Raiders next week.
No, he shouldn't. He shouldn't,
and nor should he be.
He shouldn't need to. He shouldn't be. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that he kind of came into this game and looked at it, as we got to do what we need to do to win this game. I have to do what I need to do to win this game, and the Chiefs were far more willing to let him run than I expected. They didn't put a spy on him until much later in the game, and I think that his decisiveness in pulling the ball down and scrambling to get chunk yards instead of waiting for something to develop downfield, he just kept their drives going. I think he really had a good feel early on for, the lack of time the offensive line was going to give him, and the fact that and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. I just didn't feel like the Ravens receivers were getting separation downfield, and the Chiefs were also bracketing Mark Andrews. They did a very good job against the Ravens passing offense. I mean, Lamar still threw for 273, but I think Lamar very early recognized what their game plan was, and if it's make Lamar run, Lamar's going to run. And I think his decisiveness, and I keep saying decisiveness, but I think it's so important in recognizing that, saying, fine, but if I'm going to run, I'm getting 8 to 10, not 3 to 4, was really key in keeping a lot of those drives going. I don't think not a perfect performance, but I will say that performance beats 30 other teams in the NFL. And you went up against the one that is well coached enough and talented enough on the other side of the ball, on their own offense, to match you. It was impressive. I guess forced in the sense of the urgency and him really feeling like he's got to make every play. But I felt like he didn't kind of throw caution to the wind, throwing the ball downfield. He mostly kept the ball pretty safe. So I don't know. I think you play a defense that good, you play a defensive coordinator that good, and perform that well. There's really not much more you could have asked from Lamar from last night. This is kind of the MVP that we saw last season. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to say about it. Just outstanding, and that's kind of what he's going to need to be. And we know this. It's what he needs to be against the best teams, and that still requires the rest of the team to get their job done, which not everyone did. So before we get into kind of what some of the downsides of the game were, let's talk about the offensive player of the game. And before we talk about the obvious answer, I want to talk about Justice Hill, who I think is really an unsung hero for this team. Those last few reps against Chris Jones were some of the best running back pass protection reps you're going to see. We can, I don't know if you do that 2 snaps in a row, but he hung in there against Chris Jones in a way that you just don't see running backs do. And it was a creative strategy from Monken. He caught a ton of passes out of the backfield, really soft hands, got yards after the catch. That really, really big third down early on in the game on their first touchdown drive was huge. It felt like it was after a penalty. It felt like they were about to just scuffle and punt, and he caught and tightrope the sideline. I thought that was fantastic. Just a really consummate Raven. Plays hard. I think that him being on the field as much as it was good and bad. It took away a little bit from Derrick Henry and their willingness to kind of slam the ball with him. But it's not like Hill screwed up when he was in the game. Hill played pretty well all game. And I think if you don't have Isaiah Likely on the field, I think Justice Hill's probably your offensive player of the game. However, you do have Isaiah Likely. And that was a huge performance from him. The Chiefs clearly wanted to take Mark Andrews away from Lamar Jackson, and that left Likely in one-on-ones and just running wide open a good number of times, and picked up a lot of yards after the catch. Everything that we've seen throughout training camp really came together in this game, and I was just so impressed.
I think Justice Hill is the offensive player of the game,
regardless.
All because right. Justice Hill, which I did not expect. Like, Isaiah Likely had very good plays. Isaiah Likely had a very great catch and run where he saw Lamar getting outside the pocket. He kind of had the mind meld for a second, turned it upfield. Had some great routes in the end zone at the end of the day. Couldn't obviously connect and get the tippy toes down, but such is life. Game of inches,
really good
all
blocking.
The cliches. Had some good blocking. I don't think that's what he was necessarily asked to do, though. That was the Mark Andrews show in terms of who's going to be blocking. Chuck Kohler made some cameos there as well. But no, in terms of throughout the game, whenever something needed to happen, Justice Hill's number was called, whether that was it's 3rd and 9, we need to hit a swing pass and get some yards. Justice Hill made a man miss in the open field, picked up the yards. Chris Jones comes screaming off the right side. Justice Hill's there, 5'10", sub 200 pounds, and stands him up twice. And in those higher leverage moments, because Isaiah Likely seemed to kind of come from nothing sometimes, where it would just be like a play's happening and it would just kind of get to backyard again a little bit, and Isaiah Likely would just magically appear. And there is like I'm not taking anything away from that certainly, but within a more before things would get to that point, Justice Hill was the reason why things were not getting to that point.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it when you said whenever something needed to be done, he stepped up with Jones with those third downs. I think that's such a good point. And a lot of people talked about like where did Derrick Henry go, but you have Hill playing as well as he did in the passing game, and
Derrick Henry
that's
is also not going to be a 2 minute back for this offense. If anyone thought Derrick Henry was going to come out for a 2 minute drill, which they ran two of in each half, and also were kind of game scripted out of that, even though I think they game script themselves out of this sometimes, but that's another thing. Um, I think Justice Hill, like, I don't think Justice Hill is going to get this usage against the Raiders next week. I think it was an aberration of usage for Justice Hill, but it's nice to know in the back of your head Justice Hill is the RB2.
yeah, and I think that you saw flashes of this from him last year, but the amount that they were using Edwards, I think that he just didn't pop as much because I think Edwards was getting like bigger goal line carries, things like that. But Hill did all of this last year. And I
Two
think that
touchdowns week one
yeah,
last year.
and this is just increased usage. And just such a nice change of pace from Henry. The way that he complements Henry, I think, is also a really nice fit in this offense because his Henry obviously has plenty of speed, but Hill's a little more explosive. And as a
Better
pass
0 to
catcher,
60. He's got a better
yeah,
0 to 60.
and he's a good route runner from running back. He's got some shake to him. So yeah, I think I think that's a good call. I think that you can go co-offensive players of the game with Likely and Hill. Defensive player of the game, I found a little bit harder to assign because for two reasons. One, the defense did not play up to their standards this game, and Roquan
But
Smith
it
was very clear
weirdly
about that.
also did.
Yeah, well, again, we'll it's just this is what happens against Mahomes, right? Is they came up big in a lot of high leverage moments, but they also just blew two big plays. And it was those two plays to Xavier Worthy. We could talk about that right now. Clearly a miscommunication on the back end on the touchdown. That is a play I've seen the Chiefs run a number of times with the mountain swing with the mountain motion, um, setting up the pass to the running back, but looking for a hole shot against for the outside receiver when the outside cornerback collapses. Humphrey got caught in the middle. He wouldn't have been in position to make a play on the running back either. He just got caught in the middle, and Jackson was not over the top to help him. And on the reverse, they just rush downfield. I mean, it was just a complete lack of discipline from too many players rushing downfield to try and blow up what they thought was going to be I guess a jet sweep initially, and it turned into an end around. But to me, that's just an example of both of those plays. To me, are examples of this is a first year defensive coordinator. The same things happened with Mike McDonald when he was during his first few games. I'm not particularly worried about but I think the defense would tell you that those big plays more than anything were what broke their backs last night, and because they stood firm against Mahomes, Freed, still a very good Chiefs offense for much of that game. They held against some short fields, but
They tackled Mahomes twice.
yeah, and
I remember
they tackled
three times.
pretty well. They tackled
No,
pretty well.
that's where we depart.
I didn't see it. I didn't feel like they had a ton of missed tackles.
The Pacheco one. There's the Pacheco one that stood out. I mean,
When he
Malik
rolled over, I
Harrison
mean,
ones. Kyle Hamilton missed a couple.
Hamilton missed a couple. Harrison just and we can talk about this now too. There, Reed isolating linebackers and coverage was just really smart, a little bit predictable, but him doing it with Rice instead of Kelsey, I think, threw off the Ravens, who were expecting Reed to try and get Kelsey on Simpson and Smith, and instead they moved Rice around. They would bring out a heavy set and then motion into empty, and then bring a receiver inside against a linebacker. And the Ravens were in a lot of zone coverages, or they were in match coverages that you pick up your man as they come off the line of scrimmage. And that's what Andy Reid does. He identifies the rules of the defense and he breaks them over his leg like a ruler. That's to me, that's very much what happened last night. Orr's going to continue to get better and get this defense sharper. I'm curious to see how the team talks about their usage of the cornerbacks this week. A lot of snaps for Jalen Armour Davis. Wiggins rotated in
It's weird.
there. Marlon Humphrey was in the slot and playing outside. It was a lot of moving pieces. This is a big, this to me, this is one, Ardarius Washington played really well on very limited snaps. Would have loved to see more of him. And I think the team is missing Arthur Maulet. Maulet, I think, is incredibly underrated. He had a fantastic training camp. He looked like the best defender on the field for a lot of times during throughout the summer. And I think that not having him as a guy that you could just go to in the slot forced you to mix and match what you're doing in the slot more than you want to, moving guys inside, outside, rotating outside cornerbacks in and out. So yeah, I mean, I think they played very well against a very good offense, but they didn't play up to, I think, the Ravens defensive standards from the last two seasons, which is to be expected with a new defensive coordinator. As for player of the game, I thought this was kind of tough. I mean, Nnamdi Madubuike was really good up the middle. I felt like him, Jones, and Pierce were all wreaking havoc up the middle. And while they weren't always directly responsible for the pressures, they were helping create the opportunities for elsewhere. David Ojabo had that great pass rush and sack early on, but then kind of faded as the game went on. I thought Odafe might have been the team's most consistent defender. He was really good against the run. I think his play against the run in the second half was a big part of the Ravens' ability to stay in that game defensively and not let the Chiefs get some of the easy yards on early downs that they were getting in the first half. And he gave Kingsley Suamataia plenty of trouble. I mean, I felt like the NBC broadcast was trying to pump up Suamataia, and then they'd show a clip of Owe beating him. Not the game wrecker. I'm going to come in and destroy things that you really hope for him coming out against what is a pretty weak tackle duo for the Chiefs. He did what he always does, which is he did miss a sack on Mahomes in the backfield. But I guess this was the tough thing for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on who you'd identify from this defense. I have a feeling I think I might know who you're going to say, but I'm curious. I felt like no one really stood out. Roquan had the interception, but he got picked on in coverage, right? Ojabo had that one sack, but faded. Owe was maybe the most consistent, but couldn't finish that big play. And then I think that's what brings me back again to the interior of this defensive line and how big of a job they did in getting pressure on Mahomes.
I'd give it to them as a whole. I'm very curious who you think I'm going to say because I'm laughing because I think you think I want to say Ardarius Washington because I am the Ardarius Washington's biggest fan. I'm not, even though he played well. I thought Marcus Williams had a good game for the most part. That PBU especially by the goal line was really, really, frankly, needed to stay in the game. I kind of agree with you where no one really had a consistently great day at the office. It's just really when some dudes were on, some dudes were off, some dudes were off, some dudes were on. No one was ever firing on all cylinders, but it never really fell completely apart other than that one Marlon Humphrey thing. So I would say, and I don't necessarily blame Marlon Humphrey solely for that either. If I had to pick one, I'd probably give it to Madubuike.
So I thought you were going to bring up Trenton Simpson because I felt like and that's I think,
and that's the problem.
Malik Harrison got a lot of snaps playing inside linebacker.
Too many snaps.
Too many. He really is an early down outside linebacker. He really he was out in space way too often. And it was clear to me that the defense was better when Simpson was on the field. Now, Simpson didn't have an individually super explosive game. He did have that huge play against Mahomes late. Huge play. He didn't have like a crazy explosive game otherwise, but I felt like the defense was more consistently better with him on the field. I felt like it wasn't, Harrison was a liability in coverage next to Smith. Simpson is much more sound in coverage. So I'm hoping that this was more of, again, a lot of the usage throughout this game was weird. The amount of Jalen Armour Davis that we saw, the lack of Ardarius Washington, Tavius Robinson actually only played 14 snaps. I was expecting him to play more than that, especially after Kyle Van Noy went down, which is going to be an orbital fracture, and no Brent Urban. So again, this is Orr's first time as a DC. this is going to happen. He's still going to be a very good defense, still going to be a very good head coach. Or still going to be a very good defense, still going to be a very good defensive coordinator. But yeah, I think Simpson, the defense is better with him on the field, and I really think that there's not a lot of reasons to not have him be almost Roquan's full-time running mate. I think, you're going to have some lapses. That's going to happen. But Harrison is having the same lapses and does not have the upside to make up for it, to me. So moving on to best play, and we're going to have two more positive things to talk about here before we get into some of the game struggles. Best play, I got 4 nominees: likely catch and run with that Lamar-esque juke at the end, the Roquan interception, which was more of a really bad throw by Patrick Mahomes, David Ajabo's sack, which I mentioned earlier. That was the technique on that. I was just really, really happy with the way that he dipped, kept his arm free, and looped it all the way around to hold on to Mahomes, which is a key against Mahomes that I think Owe should pick up on. Is you gotta loop onto him. You gotta lock onto him somehow and let the rest of your guys get there. You can't dive at his feet or try and, drag him down by yourself, because I don't know if Ajabo gets that sack completely by himself, unless help arrives, but he let the help get there. And then I had Rashad Bateman's catch, which was, just the weekly, why can't we see this more often from Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman? But that was a huge play late in the game that, you couldn't have asked for Bateman to make his one big play in a bigger moment. So I don't know if you had any other nominees for best play, but what's your pick?
I'm a Bateman truther, so I will give it to the Bateman catch. I will never not. I'll never give up. You all can tell me I'm wrong, not you specifically, buddy, but everyone will tell me I'm wrong, and I will face God and walk backwards into hell. So I will give it to the Bateman catch. I think another one. I thought Travis Jones had some really, really good rushes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Ojabo sack, for what it was at the time when I saw that David Ojabo sack, like it felt like just the frustrations and everything, like that felt like something for a brief moment, which was really, really great. So I think that was probably my most aha defensive play, and then the Bateman catch, like I said.
Yeah. But then we just didn't see enough from Ojabo, I think, the rest of the game. And he played 25 snaps, was pretty sound in rush defense, not horrible, but I think that's one of the things that they got to figure out is their
better than Van Noy. He was better than Van Noy.
Yeah, and their lack of comfort with him against the run, though, is maybe an area to switch Harrison in there and then get Simpson in back in the middle of the defense. But anyway, best unit, I had 2 nominees here. We talked about the defensive line already, and we talked about the running backs a lot already. So I guess I can just ask you, which of those units do you think you would give best unit to?
Justice Hill's carrying the running backs. Let's be clear. This is not Derrick Henry slander. Like, I'm not here to slander Derrick Henry, but I don't know. I don't think Derrick Henry played particularly well. I don't think there was a world where Derrick Henry was going to play particularly well, frankly, in this game. So I think the running backs are kind of by default giving it to Justice Hill, which means I think it's the defensive line. I think the defensive line, Roquan said it himself, you got to stop the run to have a chance, and everyone laughed at him, but they stopped the run and they had a chance.
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about the whole unit this whole podcast, so I think you're absolutely right. The only guy who's a little disappointed me is Broderick Washington, who I'm just not sure he's a Raven after this year. They signed him into that extension, hoping to lock in a guy that they hope would ascend. But they just haven't seen that next level of development from him since signing that contract. And I think that this is a really talented defensive line unit. So I just felt like he stood out a little bit in terms of his lack of ability to really disrupt. Let's move on to the worst unit. I want to talk about the receivers here briefly, because I know we're going to get into the offensive line, but I want to talk about the receivers here briefly. I haven't got a chance to go back and watch the all 22 of the game yet. The reason I bring up the receivers here is not just on the players themselves. I also felt like it was on usage. Todd Monken, it just feels obsessed with these bubble screens and these quick flats and getting the ball into Zay's hands really quickly, which worked sometimes, but it just gets called. To me, I just think it's way too often their play call. It's way too often what they check into against the blitz. And I feel like you're just not putting guys in a great position to succeed when you're just allowing cornerbacks to just play downhill right at them. You have to have some more stuff developing downfield. I also felt like the guy, like I felt like Nelson Aguilar did not have a particularly good game, especially that big play with Zay, that
The
fourth
block.
down. Yeah, whatever that is, I think that you can talk about play call, you can talk about coaching and knowing and making sure Aguilar knows his assignment, but that guy's a vet that should just know that he's lined up against the Chiefs' best defensive player, not named Chris Jones, and cannot just let him have an open pass to Zay Flowers. It doesn't you're supposed to I think he was thinking you're supposed to take him inside, but the way that the Chiefs use their cornerbacks, the way they weaponize their cornerbacks is to play downfield, play downhill. And I think that him trying to just take McDuffie inside instead of engaging him just plays right into what the Chiefs want to do. And I felt like the receivers did that a lot throughout the game. Again, part of that is due to play call, part of that is due to execution. Bateman, again, I haven't watched the game through again, so I don't know how open he really was getting downfield, but it really felt like Bateman and Flowers, Aguilar, were not getting separation downfield, and certainly not getting it quick enough, I think, with this offensive line where it was. So I don't want to harp on the receivers too much because I think it also has a lot to do with the offensive line, a unit that just clearly struggled. I don't think it surprised anybody that they struggled. I felt like Ronnie Stanley had quite a good game. Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum, this won't surprise anyone, had quite a good game at center and left tackle. They did their jobs. I think that Stanley had 57 pass blocking snaps last night and just looked sharp on all of them. I was just pretty impressed with his performance. Patrick McCary, I think, did well. Roger came in and got beat. He just got beat too many times on two little snaps, and I don't know if I loved going with the rotation and then ended up going with McCary for pretty much the whole second half. And I also felt like Daniel Falele he's just not a guard. I know that they really like his pass protection at right guard. He got beat a couple times. I mean, again, this is against Chris Jones, so I'm willing to kind of not throw him under the bus for his pass protection, but he's just not getting movement in the run game. And he's 380 pounds and he's not moving guys in the run game. And I think that is a bigger issue to me of this offensive line. Voorhees, fine. He's, first start in the NFL. That was his first start in the NFL. To me, that's exactly what the first start in the NFL is going to look like for a guy like Andrew Voorhees, who's not a blue chip offensive line prospect coming out of college. He's day two guy potentially before his injury, but he spent a whole year off rehabbing from an ACL injury. So my concern level is really more at what they're going to do at right guard, if they want to stick with Falele there, and how they're going to handle right tackle. Rosengarten needs the snaps to get better. McCary is the better option right now. That McCary can come in and out of the game, but I'm not sure that I don't know about Rodgers' ability to do that. That's tough to do. McCary's very used to it. I don't know if that's the best way to develop a guy like Roger, who needs to get better at his anchor and kind of the physical aspect of the game. And part of that is playing a full game. So maybe I just had lower expectations for the offensive line coming in, knowing what this unit was looking like. But it was clear that they were not good enough, even within the game plan. Even within the game plan that was designed to try and help them, they just were not good enough.
No, even within the most Mickey Mouse game plan of how can we make sure our offensive line has to do as little as possible, it wasn't good enough. You said the hypothetical in the receivers of why are we doing so much, for lack of a better term, lateral movement or lateral directions with our receivers? Why are we throwing all the bubbles? Why are we doing the pitchy boo boo end arounds and everything like that? Because the offensive line can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
They could not do anything. So I disagree with you on the receivers because I think receivers, and especially when you're going against corners that are going to play man the way this team will play man on you, need reps, especially to kind of see, okay, this corner is going to play me with this leverage, this corner is going to play me with that leverage. You need to be able to see how they want to do things. Like you can't necessarily hope that essentially they're going to come in cold and just and immediately know what good DBs, which the Chiefs have, are going to do to
Hmm.
them. And I think that the game plan was what it needed to be, frankly, because of the circumstances. But I don't think that that means that the receivers weren't able to win downfield because they only had maybe like a third or half of the time they threw the ball, someone was going downfield, and most of the time it was just a sacrificial X taking the top off.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that factors in a play call. I think that factors in a play call too. I thought Zay did a pretty good job getting yards after the catch. There were a couple times where I just think he needs to
Go
get the
forward,
yards in front of him. Yeah, there was one particular play where I was
the
like,
one
"You're
on the
going to
left
lose a
side,
first down."
the
Yep.
one on
Where I don't know if he lost the first down or got very close to losing a first down that he had. Um, and like that's got to be that's got to be coached better. When you're getting a ball into a guy's hands like that, when that's your plan against the blitz, it's you can't keep moving laterally. You got to get upfield. And he's the guy they seem to always want to go with those bubble screens. I'm not sure if it's worth trying to do that with some other players just to mix it up, and not make it be so predictable. Because this is something that's happened last year. This was what they did last year against the blitz, and I feel like it's just too predictable and plays way too much into the Chiefs defense and how they like to use their cornerbacks, like you said. So I guess that's fair. I think it came down more to the game plan. I guess it did come down more to the game plan and the offensive line as to where the receivers struggled. But I think, as much as I really like Bateman, loved Zay, I have a lot of respect for Aguilar. It was nice to see Tom Wallace on the field. Um, when they play teams with worse cornerbacks, they have to show up more than they did last night. So I think that I don't know. I just think that a lot of times from the angles I could tell that were like behind Lamar when he was looking downfield, they just weren't getting separation. Um, I haven't gone back and watched the game again to really pick it apart. But I think them not winning and their inability to win routes early, win routes off the line of scrimmage, was another thing, which it's not necessarily easy, but I feel like if your offensive line is going to be as weak it is, the receivers have got to step up, and they just did. Um, let's move down to the end of the bar because I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of coaching of this game. Um, like I said earlier, the illegal formation penalties early on, fine. But I think second half was inexcusable. Rashad Bateman, again, this didn't matter in the game because it was an incomplete pass anyway. But Rashad Bateman not being on the line of scrimmage and covering up the left tackle was like maddening. That's like a very, very basic thing that just should not be happening. Having to call timeouts on defense. They were in Arrowhead, so the delays of game and issues with the snap in the
oh,
first half. I'm like, okay, but this is not like news that you're going to be in Arrowhead. This is not like a shocker that they're very loud. And the amount of times that Lamar is like screaming at Todd Linderbaum to snap the ball was way too high. How much of that is on Lamar versus Munkin versus Harbaugh is unclear. I think, Derrick Henry's usage was, I think you said this earlier, they game scripted themselves out of using Henry. And I felt like they went away from him in the first half. I felt like it wasn't
they
even the
did.
second half they went away from him. And again, it's this belief that you have to score 30 points to beat the Chiefs. Now, was that true last night? Yes, but it didn't have to be. I feel like that's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that the Ravens got them to get themselves into. I've talked about the play call against the blitz, a couple high leverage downs that I did not like. Their play call on. I talked about Zach Orr a good bit already. But something I hinted at early on, and this is something that you've really keyed in on, so I want you to take over from here, is that these are the same issues. They might be slightly different versions of the same issues, but it is frustrating to see a team that is this talented play as well as they did and just clearly be not the better coach team, and that being maybe the main difference in the game.
No. I was scrolling Twitter like right before this, and I saw Nick Wright, who I will roll my eyes at religiously, tweeted out something along the lines of like Lamar Jackson's great against like all these teams, but against Patrick Mahomes, the Steelers, and he was like Patrick Mahomes is contemporary rival, for lack of a better term. The Steelers, his team's rival, and in the playoffs, Lamar Jackson is 4-12, um, with like a 75 passer rating, like all these mediocre to average stats. And it's like, oh, he's great against everyone else, but like that's why like these are the facts, and these are the facts. And I have said this. This is why am. I'm not done, but I'm just so thoroughly unsurprised because yes, it is a winner and a loser game. Like it is a no sums win, no sums losses game. But how you win and how you lose do matter, and especially how you lose matters because I can stomach losing in the playoffs. I could stomach being a Bills fan right now because the Bills lost the 13 seconds game. The Bills lost the DeMar Hamlin fake punt, which was Sean McDermott should have lost his job immediately for that, frankly. But they played well in those games. They did not deserve to lose. They had played up to that team's capabilities for the most part within the context of what that team was that season. This team, every single time, without fail, it's if they lose, you know, against any of those scenarios, against the Chiefs, against the Steelers, against in the playoffs, if they're going to lose, you know exactly how it's going to go before it even happens. You can tell after the first quarter how this game is going to be lost, and it's like watching a car crash in slow motion. The defense is going to, for the most part, play pretty heroically and then have one backbreaking play. Check. The offense is going to look frantic, hurried, headless chickens. No one's going to be able, no one knows what's going on. It's a fire drill at all times. We have to snap the ball. We have to snap the ball. Why are we not set? Check. The receivers, something's going to go wrong with a receiver every single time. Check. We have the toe, which is not likely his fault, but it happened. The refs are going to do some nonsense. That is a given in any game, though, for every single team. Check. And most important, there's going to be bad clock management. Check mark in the second half. And just operationally, the team will crumble. It is not Lamar Jackson's. It is Lamar Jackson not playing well or up to those standards, yes, but the environment of that team deteriorates so drastically under those circumstances because everyone looks like they're all trying to win the game single-handedly. There is no unity on that team. There is no central calming presence, and this is not to kind of jump the shark here if you were going to plan to talk about this later, but no one reins them in. No one reins them in. It is a team that loves being the rah-rah, we go on emotion. We are who's got it better than us? Nobody. It's us against the world. Blah 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 blah. That's all well and good, and I'm so thrilled that it works when you inevitably will go beat the Oakland Raiders by 20 points next week. But it doesn't matter because they get so far out over their skis every single time. From Zay Flowers talking mad shit in the AFC Championship game and getting way too emotional and trying to do too much, to Lamar Jackson forcing a throw in the AFC Championship game that frankly he didn't need to force. Who cares if you get a flag there or not? To the offensive line in 2019 not knowing what to do when someone dared stand up against them and actually take a game to them. To the defensive line in 2019 not knowing what to do when someone dared run the ball on them because, oh my God, we're so used to being out ahead with a lead. Every single time there's adversity, or they not even at this point, they're so afraid of adversity at this point that they already just start crumbling the minute they think it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go quite
that was a scathe. That was a bit
far.
too scathing, and that was probably some
I don't
next
think
day.
this team
But
is not used to adversity. I do think that they paint themselves as the underdogs. They're not.
no,
They know they're not. I think there's like this weird incongruency between embracing the national underdog narrative, but also being like, oh, well, we block that stuff all out. I don't know. I don't like, I think some level of this is still frustration from the AFC Championship game. And a
Probably.
lot of people coming into this game, something you talked about, something Kyle Phoenix over at Baltimore Beatdown tweeted about as well. It was a lose-lose. You win the game and everyone says this is what you should have done in January. You lose the game and everyone says, see, they can't get it done. And
This was
it's an
actually one of the better
unfortunate,
case scenarios, I think, for the game,
yeah,
personally.
and it's an unfortunate truth for the Ravens this season that these games do not matter until the playoffs. They're they have to get to the playoffs. I don't want to get way too far ahead of myself here, but they're really, if they don't get to the playoffs, something much bigger has gone wrong than the stuff that we're talking about right now. I think that's fair
It's
to say.
injuries. It'll be injuries.
Yeah, injuries or just something much, much bigger of some other sort has gone wrong with this team if they can't make the playoffs with this level of talent and the fact that they still have um uh, like a strong coaching staff. However, it is not the best coaching staff. It is not, and it's something we talked about last night. John Harbaugh is maybe not a top 5 coach in the NFL anymore. There was a long time where he was considered. I'm not sure he still is top 5 anymore. We talked about a lot of other coaches last night that we might trust in big games. We don't need to get into all that here. Point being, you almost need a top 5 coach the way the Chiefs have Reed, the way that the Niners have Shanahan. And I'm not calling for any referendums on Harbaugh after week 1. But
Certainly not with me.
no, but I think my point of all this is I actually don't like you said about the Raiders next week. They could win by 40 points. It wouldn't make a difference to me. The rest of the season, I'm looking at their big games against the Bengals, the Bills, the Cowboys. How do they show up in maybe not the Cowboys because they demolished NFC teams, but the Bengals, the Bills.
The Bengals, they always play well. I'm actually not that worried about the Bengals.
I'm not that worried about the Bengals either, but the part
The
of the
Bills
thing
is
is
a good test.
the Bills are a good test. Do they play the Texans in the regular season this year? I forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to be probably a really good test.
I don't
But
think the Texans are a good test.
all of this really matters not that much until we get to the playoffs and they run into these things again. I think that the emotionality of this game played a big factor into it. You hinted at this before with Lamar, with Harbaugh, with the whole team, really. I think the emotionality played into this game. And that's why I'm hesitant to have any like big sweeping takeaways that I didn't already have. We knew John struggled with clock management. We know that the offense
You're
struggles.
16, by the way.
Right. We know that the offense struggles to just get set at the line. And you can talk about
You're
Harbaugh.
6, by the way.
You could talk about Harbaugh. You can also talk about Monken. You can also talk about Lamar Jackson. I think that a lot of the talk about giving all this power to Lamar Jackson and giving him reign over the offense, it also means that some of these questionable play calls, some of these issues with getting his guys to the line, knowing where everyone's supposed to be, some of that does come back on him. He's the $260 million quarterback. He's the man on the field. Something that you and I have gone back and forth on a lot is how easy it is to criticize coaching because in theory anyone can do it, whereas what the guys that are doing on the field, not all of us can do, right? But that's why those guys are getting paid the hundreds of millions of dollars. And as great as Lamar was last night, what you were saying earlier about needing someone to rein him in, they don't have that.
Nope.
And I don't know if that comes down to Monken, if that comes down to Harbaugh. I don't know where T. Martin figures into all this. But to me, it's okay. They had the same issues. They still almost won the dang football game. This is very much the same team that we've come to love and sometimes be really frustrated by because they
weirdly enough, I think the way you rein him in is there's the way you rein him in is by giving him the keys and sometimes I think they don't rein him in. You do not need I'm sick of the not narrative, but the idea that Lamar Jackson needs a coach to believe in him. Still, and John Harbaugh gets so much credit for this today. I'm not making this John referendum conversation because it's week 1, and I want John, and I am going on record saying John Harbaugh is the only coach I think that can get this team to a Super Bowl this year. I don't think there's a single other coach that can, given the circumstances, because the one that could now lives in my new home of Seattle, Washington. But John Harbaugh and Todd Monken do not need to be people that are believing in Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson's a two-time MVP. There are 30 other coaches out there that would give up their quarterback in a heartbeat for him if they could. This is not a matter of we need someone to believe in Lamar and we have his back. Lamar does not need someone to have his back. Lamar needs someone to yank him back by the collar sometimes when he tries to do too much and go full Superman because he can 40% of the time. And 60% of the time, he understandably is a human being.
Yeah, and I think that and this is where Monken comes in. I think this is where he needs to have different answers against the blitz. I would have loved
Yep.
to have seen like a draw last night, for
QB
example,
draw.
a QB draw or halfback draw. I'm glad they didn't try to execute any running back screens because I don't think that would have looked great with the offensive line. But I still think that some of those times where you kind of not take the ball out of Lamar's hands, but you do have Derrick Henry now. And I felt like
It was also very uncreative with their use of Derrick Henry.
yeah,
It
and
felt
and
very just like, all right, go.
yeah, and I felt like they didn't run many, if any, option plays with him, and I feel like that is a huge threat
Yep.
that they need to have that in the playbook. And Lamar's the Ravens have been very praised. They've praised Lamar Jackson's command at the line of scrimmage a lot, and you see it in games, you see it pop up, but I think he just gets stuck in whatever Monken has dialed up, whatever they're supposed to go to against the blitz. That's what he goes to. I feel like there's almost like you either have to completely unlock things for him and let him draw up a play against the blitz, or you need to have something a little bit more set and prescriptive. Instead of okay, you can run the play or you can check into the blitz and that's your control, or you can check into the blitz beater and that's your control of the offensive line. But these blitz beaters against this Chiefs defense were never going to work. And this, again, I think this is why Lamar at a certain point just started running the ball because that's what he saw and that's what was working. And that's all well and good. I have no issue with Lamar running the ball as much as he did. I don't think, like we said earlier, he's going to do that in every game. But I think that is more a result of not having the right answers in the first place. And if the Ravens are going to talk so much about Lamar and how involved he is in this offense, then I think as great as he played last night, he does also need to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how can I, from my vantage point on the field, do a better job of diagnosing and beating blitzes?
And when I say keep him in line and give him the ball on his own terms, call up more designed QB runs. There's so much scrambling. So many of his rushes now are scrambles that and we're just like, all right, the offensive line crumbled, time to go. And I think part of A, keeping a defense honest to it, and B, kind of placating the Josh Allen gene in Lamar, for lack of a better term, is to just say, all right, bro, here's the play. We're going run the Greg Roman special, run QB power off left tackle, and just go. We'll just let him go. And just let him get it out of his system every now and then. If it's on that 4th and 3 at midfield, line him up, bring in Ricard, bring in the boys, QB power left tackle, just go.
Yeah.
Like, keep it simple sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that calling some of those plays lets the offensive line, let him rush downfield.
Yep.
But so many of those dropbacks that turned into scrambles were because it was very obviously a drop back. And the Chiefs were just pitting their ears back and bullying the Ravens offensive line down the field. And Lamar had to step up and scramble. And so I felt like it was just, I don't think you were about to say be aggressive.
No, I was going to say be aggressive on your terms. Do not have the option do not give him the option for aggressiveness every single time because Lamar Jackson is an emotional human being, for better and for worse. It has driven him to be a incredible Hall of Fame level player. And it also is, we said he was the best player I've ever seen for 98% of the time. And those 2%, he's incredibly emotional and he's emotionally driven and he's going to be natural and see things faster than everyone else. So be controlled and be intentional with when you're pressing the gas and don't necessarily always have the nitrous option right there.
Yeah. And I think like, it's there. You can go to that well anytime you need to. But I think when that is when that almost becomes a part of the game plan, I think that's when your passing game especially is in a lot of trouble. When, I thought it was, funny when Greg Roman was offensive coordinator, he talked about, well, we use Lamar's legs as a check down. And I get that on some level, but that tells you how much him scrambling is built into their passing game plan. And I think that his legs need to be used in their passing game more to move the pocket. I would have loved to see maybe a little more play action. I know that's tough with this offensive line, but maybe you try and move the pocket. I'm on record hating their sprint outs in the red zone, but I do love their sprint outs when they have the whole field to work with, because you cut the field in half in the red zone, you've got this tiny little box to work with. Naked boots. Sprint outs when you've got the whole field to work with. You've seen those plays where Likely or Andrews will. You've seen those plays where Likely or Andrews will fake blocking and release upfield. We just didn't see any of that kind of creativity with Lamar's legs in the passing game last night. A lot of it was after the snap, and I don't think that is sustainable. But on the flip side, it almost worked against a really, really good defense. So I think it's just, I don't know. I know we just spent a lot of time talking about what Lamar can do better. And I just want to reiterate again at the end of the conversation, he played out of his mind last night. It's just that with this offense, where it is, there just has to be more built in to let that be the nuclear option if you really need it, but not the game plan. That's about all I have for last night's game. Thayjus, do you have any last notes, or do you want to talk a little bit about next week's matchup?
They're gonna nuke the Raiders, man. I almost don't want to talk about it. They're gonna nuke the Raiders.
I just think that this team playing Gardner Minshew at home, it's going to be a very good test. It's a very good defensive line. That is going to be the big thing I'm watching for next game.
Yeah.
I don't really want to baptize Roger Rosengarten by fire by matching him up against Max Crosby all next game. That is a tough matchup for him. And I thought McCary actually played quite well last night. I still think he's the best option at right tackle. I don't think there's much to say about next week other than, run the ball and be yourself. Don't let yourself fall into this trap of, it's second and long, we got to pass the ball, because you can get 6-7 yards on the ground consistently. Use the read option game. I think that's probably the one thing I would say. Use the read option game a little more, really put those defenses in a bind, especially when you have Likely on the field, because you can put them in multiple binds at once. And I think that's where this offense can go, but they have to get some of this foundational stuff right first. So that's about all I had for today. Thayjus, thank you so much for joining me. Definitely want to have you on for future podcasts, because I feel like our back and forth, I think, is pretty fun. We've known each other for a really long time, so I think it always makes for interesting conversations.
We agree on things most of the time, and then we don't. It's for very, very. I don't think either are wrong. I think we just approached it from opposite ends of a starting point.
Yeah, and I think. Yeah, and I think a lot of times, like you said, we do end up at the same conclusions, and I think that's same conclusions can be frustrating, because it's the same thing with this team. But again, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone who listened, thanks for joining, and we'll see you back here next week.
1